Hello, Pack. Tonight begins with a breaking. Not the loud kind, not shouting, not a door thrown open, not a name called across a crowded room. The quiet kind. The kind that happens when a woman walks down a corridor she wasn't supposed to walk down. At an hour she wasn't supposed to be awake and sees something through a half-open door that rearranges every truth she thought she was standing on. Mara didn't cry. She stood in that corridor for exactly as long as it took to understand what she was seeing. And then she turned around and she walked back the way she came, and she did not make a single sound. By morning, she was gone. He would spend 5 years trying to find her. He had no idea what was waiting at the end of the search. Let's begin. Mara had been the Alpha King's mate for 11 months when it ended. She had arrived in his territory the way most things arrived there, quietly, without fanfare, brought in by the mechanics of a bond neither of them had asked for. She had been 23. He had been 28. The bond had announced itself the way bonds did, a warmth behind the sternum, a second heartbeat that wasn't hers, a pull toward him that her body understood before her mind gave it permission. His name was Calder. He was the kind of man who took up space without trying, broad through the shoulders, gray eyes that went very still when he was thinking, a voice that had the particular flatness of someone who had learned early that measured words were safer than honest ones. She had not expected to love him. She had not planned for it. But 11 months in a fortress with someone who made her feel, for the first time in her adult life, like she was allowed to take up space. It happened anyway. She had loved him the way she did most things, carefully, completely, without making a performance of it. Her sister Lena had come to visit in the 10th month. Lena was the kind of beautiful that rooms noticed. Warm where Mara was precise, easy where Mara was considered. The sort of woman who laughed at the right moments and touched arms and remembered the names of servants. Mara had always loved her without reservation. It had never occurred to her to be afraid of her. She should have been paying more attention. She had not been sleeping well that week. The bond had been doing something strange, a low-grade restlessness she couldn't locate, like a sound just below the range of hearing. On the 4th night of Lena's visit, she woke at 2 in the morning with the restlessness sharpened into something else, something with a specific direction, and she had followed it down the corridor because she thought he might be in the study, because he sometimes worked late, because she had intended to bring him tea and sit with him in the quiet, the way they sometimes did. The door was half open. She stopped. She understood what she was seeing in the time it takes to draw one breath. The bond, that warm, steady thing behind her sternum that had been her second heartbeat for 11 months, screamed. There was no other word for it. A sound through the connection that had no volume but registered in every nerve she had. A tearing that was located in her chest and her throat and the backs of her hands all at once. She had read about this in the old texts. She had translated accounts of it in manuscripts that were centuries old, describing the sensation of a bond betrayed as something physical, something that left marks. The manuscripts had not been exaggerating. She stood in that corridor for 6 seconds. She counted them. She was the kind of person who counted things when she was afraid. Then she turned around. She did not cry. She did not go back to their room. She went to the small chamber where she kept her work, her manuscripts, her translation tools, the leather satchel she had carried since she was 19. And she moved with the particular efficiency of someone who has decided something and is not going to revisit the decision. She took what mattered. She left what didn't. She stood at the door of that room for a moment with the satchel in her hand, and she did something she had never done deliberately before. She severed the bond. It was the only thing in their entire relationship that had been entirely hers to do. The old texts were clear on this. A female could sever. A male could not. It was the one domain where the balance tipped, the one act of absolute authority she possessed. She used it. The warmth behind her sternum went cold and then went silent, and the second heartbeat that had been hers for 11 months simply stopped, and the silence was so complete it felt like going deaf in a room that had always been full of sound. She left through the kitchen. She knew the servants' passages better than anyone. She had spent months mapping this fortress, the way she mapped everything, methodically, because understanding the architecture of a place was how she felt safe in it. The back gate was unguarded at this hour. She had noted that 3 months ago and filed it away without knowing why. Now she knew why. She crossed the border before dawn, moving northwest into the Blackwood toward the river that marked the edge of Calder's territory and the beginning of somewhere else. It was late autumn. The cold was the serious kind. She had a satchel, a wool cloak, 17 coins, and the particular focused calm of someone who has survived worse than this and knows it. She did not look back. In the fortress, in the corridor outside his study, Calder stood very still. He had felt it the moment she severed, a shock through the bond that woke him from wherever he had been, a cold so sudden and complete it staggered him. He had gone to their room first. Empty. He had gone to her workroom. The satchel was gone. Her manuscripts were gone. The room was clean, bed made with precision, everything arranged as though she had simply stepped out, except that the particular quality of the stillness was not temporary. He had been in enough rooms where someone was not coming back to know the difference. He stood there for a long time. Then he went to find his trackers. She was across the border before his wolves reached the tree line. Her scent ended at the river. She had walked in the water upstream for long enough that the trail fractured into nothing. He sent parties in 3 directions. He sealed the southern passes. He sent word to every Allied territory with a description and a reward, and the kind of authority that expected to be obeyed. The wolves howled that night. All of them. The entire pack, from the eldest to the youngest, lifting their voices in a sound that had no translation in human language, the specific frequency of a bond disrupted, a mate gone, a king unmated, and the pack feeling it in their collective bones. He sat in his study until morning. Lena was gone too by the following afternoon. He had not asked her to leave. She had simply left, and he had not stopped her, and that fact sat in his chest alongside everything else. A catalog of failures that he did not examine closely because examining it closely would require him to name what he had done, and he was not ready to name it. He was not, as it turned out, ready to name it for quite some time. 3 months passed. The trackers found nothing. The scent had gone cold at the border, picked up briefly near a village 2 territories north, lost again at a crossroads. She was good at disappearing. He had not known that about her. He had thought he knew her thoroughly. The discovery of this gap in his knowledge, that she had a capacity for vanishing that she had never shown him, was its own specific wound. He kept sending parties. The council began to talk. An unmated king was a political liability. There were daughters of allied pacts carefully presented. He declined each one with the flat final courtesy that had always been his default register, and the council read the room well enough not to push, and the months became a year, and the year became 2, and the trackers kept returning empty-handed. Mara, meanwhile, had walked northwest until she reached the territory of King Aldrich. She had known about Aldrich the way she knew about most things. From texts, from records, from the careful accumulation of information that was her primary mode of existing in the world. He was not an ally of Calder's. He was not an enemy either. He occupied a middle position, respected, pragmatic, the kind of ruler who made decisions based on what was useful rather than what was traditional. She arrived at his gate in the early morning, soaked through from 2 days of rain, carrying a satchel of manuscripts and 17 coins and the particular composure of someone who has decided that composure is non-negotiable. The gate guards had looked at her with the specific expression of men confronted with a situation their instructions hadn't covered. She had looked back at them and said quietly that she was a scholar of pack law with 11 years of translation experience, that she was seeking sanctuary and employment, and that she would appreciate being taken to someone with the authority to grant both. They had taken her to Aldrich. He was not what she expected, which was its own relief. She had been braced for a version of power she recognized, and instead she found a man in his mid-30s with a calm, deliberate quality that reminded her of no one she had ever known. He had listened to her without interrupting. He had asked 3 precise questions. He had offered her a position in his scriptorum, a room in the scholars' wing, and sanctuary under his protection, with the specific, practical tone of a man who was offering a contract rather than a favor. She had accepted. She did not tell him who she was. Not immediately. He did not ask. She had the sense from the beginning that he already knew more than he was saying, and that he was extending her the courtesy of letting her tell him in her own time. She told him on the 3rd month. He had listened. He had nodded once. He had said simply that his protection stood regardless, and that if Calder's trackers reached his borders, they would find his borders closed, and that she was not obligated to explain further. She had sat across from him in his study with her hands flat on the table and felt, for the first time since the corridor, like she could breathe all the way to the bottom of her lungs. She did not love Aldrich. She wanted to be precise about this, in her own accounting. He was a good man, careful, honest, genuinely kind in a way that was not performed. She was grateful to him in a way that was real and permanent. But the bond was gone, severed and silent, and she had no desire to rebuild what it had cost her so much to cut, and Aldrich seemed to understand this without being told. He offered his protection. He offered his name formally, as a shield against the political exposure of being an unmated female in a foreign territory. She accepted the formality of it and nothing more, and he accepted her terms, and they existed in a kind of mutual respect that was, she thought, more honest than most arrangements she had observed. She discovered she was pregnant 4 weeks after arriving. She sat with that fact for a long time before she let herself feel it. Then she felt it. She did not send word to Calder. She had thought about it, had sat with the question for 3 nights, turning it over, examining it from every angle the way she examined everything. He had a right to know. She knew that. But she also knew what knowing would mean. Trackers with a renewed purpose, a political claim on the children, a king who would arrive at Aldrich's gate with the full weight of his authority and the specific, terrible sincerity of a man who had realized too late what he'd thrown away. She was not ready for that. She was not sure she would ever be ready for that. She made her decision and she stopped revisiting it, which was the only way she knew how to survive a decision that cost her something. She named them Rowan and Finn. They arrived together on a night in early spring, both of them healthy, both of them carrying, unmistakably, their father's gray eyes. She held them, and she let herself grieve, briefly and completely, for the version of this that should have existed. The version where the bond was still whole, and the fortress was home. And she was not doing this in a foreign territory under a borrowed name. She allowed herself exactly 1 night of that grief. Then she got up and she rebuilt the fire, and she went to work. Rowan and Finn grew up in Aldrich's territory with the particular confidence of children who have always been loved without conditions. Rowan was the methodical one, quiet, observant, the kind of child who watched a situation for a long time before deciding how to enter it. Finn was the one who asked questions. relentlessly, with the specific directness of someone who had been raised by a woman who believed that precise language was the most important skill a person could develop. They were 4 years old when Finn asked, with no particular preamble, who their father was. Mara had been expecting the question. She had prepared for it. She had a version of the answer ready, honest, age-appropriate, stripped of the weight that would come later when they were old enough to carry it. She told them that their father was a king in a territory far away, that he didn't know about them, and that when they were older, she would tell them everything. Finn had considered this for a moment, and then said, with the particular equanimity of a 4-year-old who has decided to table a topic, that this seemed like a lot to sort out, and could they have bread? She had laughed, and it had been real, and she had filed that moment away in the specific category of things she was grateful for. The twins were 5 years and 3 months old when the scouts arrived. She knew before she saw them. A shift in the air at the tree line, a scent that reached her across the courtyard of Aldrich's fortress, with the particular quality of something she had spent 5 years not thinking about. She was in the yard with the twins, watching Finn attempt to explain something complicated to a dog that was not listening, and she went still in the way she had learned to go still when she needed to think faster than her body wanted to. Rowan looked at her. Rowan always looked at her when she went still. She said quietly that they should go inside. Rowan went. Finn negotiated briefly with the dog and then followed. There were 3 of them at the gate. Calder's men. She recognized the insignia, the particular gray and iron of his pack's colors, though she had not seen it in 5 years. They were speaking to Aldrich's gate guards with the careful courtesy of men who understood they were on someone else's territory and were choosing their words accordingly. Aldrich was beside her before she had fully decided what to do, which was one of the things she had come to rely on about him. His ability to be present without requiring her to ask. He said quietly that he could turn them away. She thought about it. She said no. She said it the way she said most things she had decided. Flat, final, no explanation offered, none needed. She said it because she was not any longer the woman who had walked out of a kitchen door in the dark. She was the woman who had crossed a hostile border in the rain and negotiated sanctuary from a foreign king and raised 2 children in a language she had taught herself from manuscripts, and built a life that was entirely hers in every way that mattered. She was not afraid of the scouts. She was not afraid of what they represented. She was, if she was honest with herself, no longer afraid of him. She went to meet them. They told her, with the careful formality of men delivering a message they had been given precise instructions about, that King Calder requested an audience. Not demanded. Requested. She noted the word. She noted that someone had chosen it deliberately. She said she would consider it. She sent them to the guest quarters and went to find the twins. Finn was in the kitchen, still in negotiation with the dog. Rowan was in the window seat of their shared room, watching the courtyard with the particular stillness that Mara had spent 5 years trying not to recognize. She sat beside Rowan, and she told them, in the direct and complete way she told them everything, that their father's men had come, and that their father would likely follow, and that nothing was going to happen that she hadn't agreed to. Rowan looked at her for a long moment and said, with the particular precision of a 5-year-old who had been raised on honest language, "Is he good?" Mara sat with that question. She said carefully that he had done something very bad, and that she didn't know yet whether he understood how bad it was, and that they would find out. Rowan nodded as though this was a satisfactory answer. Finn appeared in the doorway, apparently having concluded negotiations with the dog, and said, "Are we going somewhere?" Mara said, "Not unless we decide to." Finn said, "Good, because I told the dog I'd be back tomorrow." She looked at her children, their gray eyes, their father's jaw, The particular quality of stillness that Rowan had, and that she had spent 5 years filing away under things she was not going to examine. And she let herself feel, briefly, the full weight of what the next few days were going to cost her. Then she went to write a letter. Calder arrived on the third day. She watched him ride through Aldrich's gate from the window of her workroom, and she permitted herself one moment of simply looking at him before she returned to the manuscript she was translating. He looked older. Not badly. The years had settled on him, the way years settled on men who had spent them in difficulty rather than comfort. He was thinner through the face. There was something in the way he held himself that was different from the man she remembered. A quality of careful rather than controlled, as though he had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had learned to walk with it rather than pretending it wasn't there. She noted it. She filed it. She went back to her manuscript. Aldrich received him. She had asked him to take the first meeting and report back, and he had agreed without making her explain why she needed the buffer. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Aldrich came to find her afterward and sat across from her in the workroom and told her, with the plain directness she had always valued in him, what had been said. Calder had come alone. No delegation, no guards beyond the 4 men he traveled with. He had stated his purpose without preamble. He had found her. He knew about the children, and he was requesting, not demanding, requesting, the opportunity to speak with her directly. He had also, Aldrich said, with a slight shift in his expression that she had learned to read as the equivalent of another man raising an eyebrow, acknowledged Aldrich's protection of her as legitimate and binding, and stated that he had no intention of challenging it. She asked what Aldrich made of him. Aldrich was quiet for a moment. Then he said that Calder struck him as a man who had spent 5 years understanding the precise dimensions of what he'd done, and that this was different from a man who had spent 5 years missing someone and had confused the two things. She sat with that. She said she would meet with him in the morning. She did not sleep well. She was the kind of person who counted things when she was afraid, and she counted the stones in the ceiling of her room, and the number of steps between her door and the twins' door, and the number of years since she had stood in that corridor, and somewhere around the 4th hour she stopped counting and simply lay there and let herself be afraid for a while, because she had learned that the fear didn't go away if you refused to acknowledge it. It just found other rooms. In the morning she was ready. She chose the workroom deliberately, her territory, her manuscripts, her table. She arrived first and was seated when he was brought in, and she watched him cross the room toward her with the particular attention she gave to things she was trying to understand clearly. He stopped at the opposite side of the table. He did not sit until she indicated the chair. He sat. They looked at each other. He said her name. Just that. Her name, in the flat, careful voice she remembered, except that the flatness was different now. Not controlled. Something else. The particular flatness of someone who has rehearsed a great many things and has arrived here and found that none of them are adequate. She said, "You have something to say to me." Not a question, a direction. He said yes. He said it the way she had hoped he would say it and had not allowed herself to expect, without excuses, without the architecture of explanation that would have been an insult to both of them. He said that what she had seen was what she had seen. He said that it had been happening for 6 weeks before that night. He said that he had told himself, in the specific cowardice of that period, that the bond between them was still intact and therefore nothing was broken, and that he understood now that this was not a defense but an indictment. He said that he had sent Lena away the following day, and that it had not mattered because the damage was already done, and the person he needed to account to was gone. He said that he had spent 5 years looking for her because he had things to say that he owed her, and because he had understood, approximately 48 hours after she left, that he had been an idiot of the specific variety that doesn't realize what it has until the absence is complete and irreversible. He said all of this in short, flat sentences that landed like stones dropped into still water. Then he stopped. She held the silence for a long time. Then she said, "You decided I was too weak to know the truth." He looked at her. She said, "Not the part where it happened, the 6 weeks before. You decided that protecting me from it was the same as protecting me. You decided for me." He was quiet. Then he said, "Yes," she said, "that's the part I can't get past. Not the act. The decision that I wasn't owed the truth." He said, "I know." She said, "Do you?" He said quietly that he had had 5 years to understand exactly what he'd decided and what it had cost, and that he was not here to argue with her accounting because her accounting was correct. The silence stretched. She said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it honestly." He said, "Yes." She said, "Are you here for me, or are you here for them?" He looked at her steadily. He said, "Both. And I'm not going to pretend otherwise, because pretending things is what I did before and I'm done with it." Something in her chest moved. Not the bond. That was gone, severed. The silence still complete after 5 years. Something else. Something that was entirely her own, and therefore, she thought, more trustworthy. She said, "They know you're here." "I told them last night." He went very still. She said, "They're 5. They're going to want to meet you. I'm not going to stop that. But I need you to understand something before that happens." He said, "Tell me." She said, "They are mine. Everything they are because of what I built here. You don't walk in and claim something you weren't present for. You earn it, slowly, on their terms." He said, "Yes." She said, "I'm not finished." He said nothing. He waited. She said, "I severed the bond. It's gone. I'm not rebuilding it because you've come back and said the right things. That's not how this works. If there is anything here, anything at all, it starts from nothing, and it goes at whatever pace I decide. And if at any point I decide the answer is no, that's the end of it. No courts, no council, no pack law invoked against me." He said, "I accept that." She said, "I need you to mean it." He said, "I mean it." She looked at him for a long moment. At the gray eyes that were her children's eyes, at the jaw that was Rowan's jaw, at the particular quality of stillness that she had spent 5 years trying not to think about. And she made a decision that she knew she would spend a long time examining. She said, "I'll bring them in." Rowan came in first, which was typical. Rowan always assessed the room before Fenn arrived. Rowan stood in the doorway and looked at Calder with the specific, unembellished attention of a 5-year-old who has not yet learned to pretend to be less perceptive than they are. Calder looked at Rowan. The resemblance was not subtle. It was the kind of resemblance that didn't require commentary, that existed as its own complete statement. Calder held very still. Fenn appeared behind Rowan, assessed the situation in approximately 2 seconds, and said, "You have the same eyes as us." Calder said quietly, "Yes." Fenn said, "That's because you're our father." Calder said, "Yes." Fenn considered this, then said, "You were looking for us for a long time." Calder said, "I was looking for your mother." "But yes, a long time." Fenn said, "That's a long time to look for something." Calder said, "It is." Rowan, who had been watching this exchange with the expression of someone taking careful notes, said, "Are you going to stay?" Calder looked at Mara. Mara said, "That's not decided yet." Rowan looked at Calder and said, "Okay, but if you do, you should know that Fenn has a dog, and the dog is not negotiable." Calder said, with the particular careful quality of a man who was holding himself together by a very thin margin, "I understand." Finn said, "Good." "Do you want to see him?" Calder said, "Very much." Finn took him to the dog. Mara stood in the doorway of her workroom and watched her children walk her former maid across Aldrich's courtyard, and she let herself feel the full weight of it, the grief and the anger and the complicated, inconvenient thing underneath both of those that she was not going to name yet, because naming things before they were ready was how you broke them. She would not break this. Aldrich appeared beside her. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said quietly that Calder had agreed to his terms, that any time spent in this territory would be as a guest, not a claimant, and that Mara's word was final on all matters pertaining to the children. She said, "You negotiated terms before I met with him." Aldrich said, "I thought it was worth having them in place." She said, "Thank you." He said, "He's not what I expected." She said, "What did you expect?" He said, "A king who had come to collect something. He's a man who has come to account for something. There's a difference." She watched Finn introduce Calder to the dog with the full ceremonial gravity that the occasion apparently demanded, and she thought that Aldrich was right and that this was, in its way, more difficult than if he had come to collect. She could have refused a collection. She wasn't sure what to do with an accounting. The weeks that followed were careful. Calder did not overstep. He was present in the way she had asked him to be, on the children's terms, at the pace they set, without the urgency of a man who was trying to recover lost time all at once. He ate meals in the great hall when invited. He helped Finn with the dog, who had developed an inexplicable attachment to him that Finn considered a mark in his favor. He sat with Rowan in the window seat and answered questions with the flat, honest directness that Rowan, it turned out, responded to. Because Rowan was the kind of child who could tell when they were being managed and did not forgive it. He was not managed with Rowan. He was honest. Mara observed all of this from the careful distance of a woman who was not going to let herself be moved before she was ready. She was moved anyway. Not dramatically. Not in a single moment. In the accumulated weight of small things. The way he deferred to her without making a performance of it. The way he answered the twins' questions about the bond and about pack law with the same plain honesty he'd given her in the workroom. The way he looked at her sometimes across the table with the particular expression of a man who has no expectation of anything and is simply grateful to be in the room. She did not name it. She was not ready to name it. On the last evening of his third week, she found him in the courtyard after the twins were asleep, standing at the stone wall looking north. She stood beside him without saying anything for a while. He said, "I should go back soon. The council is running out of patience with my absence." She said, "I know." He said, "I'll come back, if you'll allow it." She said, "The twins will want you to." He said, "I know that's not the same thing as you wanting it." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "I'm not afraid of you leaving. I want you to know that. That's not what this is." He said, "What is it?" She said, "I'm afraid you'll come back and the twins will love you and I'll have rebuilt something, and then I'll find out I was wrong about the accounting. That you understood the words, but not the weight of them." He said, "That's a fair thing to be afraid of." She said, "I know it is." He said, "I can't prove it in 3 weeks. I know that." She said, "No." He said, "But I can come back, and I can keep coming back, and I can let you decide when the accounting is settled." She looked at him. She said, "That could take a long time." He said, "I have time." She said, "You have a kingdom to run." He said, "I have a kingdom, and I have this. I am capable of having both." The silence stretched between them, and it was not the silence of two people who had nothing to say. It was the silence of two people who had said enough for now. She said, "Come back in a month." He said, "Yes." She said, "And Calder." He looked at her. She said, "When you come back, bring your counsel's written acknowledgement that the twin status is formally recognized under pack law." "I'm not doing this informally." Something in his expression shifted, not relief exactly. Something more careful than relief. The particular quality of a man who has just been told that the door is not closed and is choosing not to make a scene of it. He said, "I'll have it before I leave." She said, "Good." She went back inside. She sat at her workroom table with the fire burning low and her manuscript open in front of her, and she let herself feel, carefully and completely, the thing she had been not feeling for 3 weeks. It was not the bond. The bond was gone, and she did not mourn it because the bond had been built on a foundation that had not held. This was something else. Something she had built herself in the 5 years of being precisely who she was without apology or performance, and it was therefore entirely hers, and therefore the most terrifying thing she had felt in a long time. She was not afraid of it. She was, she thought, almost ready to name it. Almost. Rowan appeared in the doorway in the particular way Rowan appeared in doorways, silently, having been awake for some time before deciding to announce it. Mara said, "You should be asleep." Rowan said, "Is he going to come back?" Mara said yes. Rowan said, "Good." Mara said, "Why good?" Rowan considered this with the seriousness it apparently deserved, then said, "Because Finn's going to be sad if he doesn't. And when Finn is sad, he talks to the dog for hours, and the dog looks at me like it's my fault." Mara laughed. It was the real kind. She said, "Go to sleep." Rowan went. She sat alone with the fire and her manuscript and the particular quiet of a life that was entirely hers, and she thought that this specific moment, this room, these children asleep down the hall, this careful and inconvenient thing she was not quite ready to name, was enough. It was more than enough. It was, in fact, everything. He came back in a month. He came back the month after that. He came back in the winter with the council's formal document and a second document that she had not asked for. A formal acknowledgement, witnessed and sealed, that any future decisions regarding the twins' territory and pack standing required her consent. She read it twice. She asked him 2 questions about the specific language of 2 clauses. He answered both without defensiveness. She signed it. He came back in the spring. He came back, and he kept coming back, and the twins grew, and the accounting continued, and somewhere in the 2nd year of his returning, she named the thing she had been carefully not naming, quietly, to herself, in her workroom, with the fire burning and the manuscripts open and the sound of Finn arguing with the dog drifting in from the yard. She named it. She did not tell him yet. She told him 6 months later in the courtyard, in the plain and direct way she told him everything, and he was quiet for a long time. And then he said that he had been in love with her since before she left, and had spent 5 years understanding that love without its object, which was the least efficient and most instructive way to understand anything. She said, "You could have led with that." He said, "I didn't think I'd earned it yet." She said, "You hadn't." He said, "And now?" She looked at him, at the gray eyes that were her children's eyes, at the man who had come to account for something and had stayed to earn something, at the particular quality of stillness that had stopped being a wound and started being simply him. She said, "Now you have. And that pack is where we leave them. Not at a ceremony, not at a declaration, not at a moment of high drama, but in a courtyard, in the late afternoon light. 2 people who had cost each other something real and had rebuilt it anyway. slowly, on honest terms, with the specific and earned warmth of something that had stopped bracing. A king who spent 5 years looking for the woman he'd failed. A woman who spent 5 years becoming someone who couldn't be failed in the same way twice. And 2 children with gray eyes who introduced their father to a dog and considered the matter mostly settled. I want to ask you something before you go. Did she wait too long? Or did she wait exactly long enough, until she was certain the man who came back was different from the man who'd let her leave? Tell me in the comments, was the accounting ever truly settled, or does some debt not fully clear? And if this story found you somewhere you needed it, share it with someone who deserves a good love story tonight. Take care of yourselves, Pack. We'll be back at the fire soon.